Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Earlier today, Owlcat announced that they have released a brand new patch for Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader. You all already know, love this game. I've done a ton of content for it, so I'm more than happy to summarize the patch for all of you. Let's not waste any time and go ahead and get right into it. So first and foremost, there's been a ton of new voice acting and cutscenes added into the game. The new voice acting includes not only that which you would see in cutscenes, but also companion banter. So you should see examples of it filtered throughout your entire playthrough. They've also fixed voice problems and pronunciation issues in the voice acting that was already in the game. So across the board, you should have a better voice acting experience. As I mentioned, they've also added a ton of cutscenes, including many introduction cutscenes for characters. So Abelard has a scene when you meet him for the first time, along with Adira and the Inquisitor, people such as that. So really cool stuff that is going to help you flesh out the game. Owlcat has also taken the time to rework some of the cutscenes that were already in the game, so you should see improved camera angles. Some of the issues that were in the scene should be ironed out, things of that nature. All the way around, we already know that Owlcat's next game is going to be fully cinematic with full voice acting, and it's going to be in the Unreal Engine. So it's cool to see them, even in Rogue Trader, try to flex more of those cinematic muscles in preparation for their new gaming extravaganza. Next up, there is now console co-op for Rogue Trader. So those of you who have bought it on the consoles, you should be able to play with each other. I've mentioned it multiple times before, but let me say again, when the next DLC drops, I am going to do a new co-op live stream of the game so that we can see all the new bells and whistles that have been added since the time we did our original live stream of the game. So that should be really interesting. For those of you who have it on PS5 Pro, 4K resolution support is now available for Rogue Trader. So the game is going to look significantly better for you. And across the board, for people who have the game on consoles, there's an in-game interface for reading the art book and listening to the soundtrack if that's something you might be interested in. There's been a massive increase in the amount of conviction points the game provides, both in conversations and in the projects that you have to do as you get more colonies. So this addresses a pretty big issue with Rogue Trader originally, where people would reach the end of the game and they would not get the maximum rank in a particular conviction, which would lock them out of certain bonuses and a couple of speech options. And there's just an overall feeling of dissatisfaction when you know you've done just about everything a game provides, and yet still it doesn't acknowledge you as the top tier version of a particular disposition. So really cool to see this get addressed. Now, if you're going into a game that you've already started, keep in mind you're not going to all of a sudden get a flood of points, because Owlcat wanted to ensure players who were loading back into their game didn't all of a sudden switch to a different disposition than the one they actually wanted. So what the game will instead do is wait until the next time you choose a conversation option or a project resolution that moves your disposition in a certain way, and then it'll give you your additional points based on that to make sure that the player has the experience that they're actually expecting. I think that's really cool and will hopefully help to ensure players have a good time with the new way this is set up. Equipment has been rebalanced and addressed as well. So 12 new force swords have been added, I think is absolutely fantastic, because Heinrichs was using the same force sword in my game for way too long. Definitely something that's needed. Good to see them do that. I'd like to see them add some more bolters to the game as well. They've added 20 additional items in loot, rewards, and vendors. It's not clear what exactly those items are though, so there might be one or two new bolters in the game. There's also been a rebalance of equipment and loot tables across the board, specifically in Acts 1 and 2, to try to give the player a better progression experience through those first two acts. Iliad and Marazé can now use more items than they were before, because Owlcat has lifted up some of the restrictions on what items Aldari and Drukhari are able to equip. So that should allow you to make those two companions much more effective than they were previously, even though, frankly, they were already monsters before. And then finally, in regards to equipment, ring weapons now cost 0 action points when you want to use them. So there are a bunch of different rings in the game that'll give you little attacks you can use during combat. For the vast majority of my playthroughs, I never bothered with them, in part because you had to use action points to utilize them and it never seemed to make sense. So now that they do not cost action points, it could potentially, depending upon a ring's effect, make more sense to use them regularly in combat. Some of the character models have been updated so that they more closely resemble their portrait. Specifically, Heinrichs, Abelard, Cabela, and Argenta have had their models reach touch stuff so that it's going to look a little bit closer. I didn't know this was an issue, but apparently there were a lot of people who were dissatisfied with the way Heinrichs' character model especially looked. And so I guess when Owlcat was updating him, they figured, you know what, we might as well update some of these other options as well. Really cool stuff. It's just great to see Owlcat really still caring about this game and trying to give players the best experience possible. Exemplar, which is the archetype that you get after you choose your first 2 archetypes, is now going to contain all the talents from previous archetypes, which, depending upon your build or the party member you're using, could be a big deal. Beforehand, some of the talents for your previous archetypes were not available in Exemplar, and so if you didn't choose them when the archetype was first available, you just never had the option to get them again. This was a big deal for Jay and for the Space Marine because you got them after they had already filled out all the levels for their first archetype, and a lot of players were dissatisfied with those builds, and the game didn't allow you to change it in any meaningful way using Exemplar. But now you can. Now you can get some of those great officer talents for Jay and really help make those characters much better, while also having more flexibility in the builds that your main character uses as well. So definitely good stuff. Grand Strategist zones can be rotated. So for those who have never used the Grand Strategist archetype before, it gives you these zones you can lay out that are going to give your entire team bonuses. Before, you kind of just had to accept whatever way the zone came up, even if it didn't reflect the way you actually wanted to use it. And that was very, very frustrating and made it much harder to use than it should have been. So it's great to hear that you can rotate those zones now so you can fit them in exactly where you want them. And then next up, I've already touched on that colonization did get some updates, but to expand on that more, it has some narrative updates in what is actually happening with these colony events. You have new rewards now that you'll be able to take advantage of, and now resources that you need to use in order to start a colonization event can be bought using Profit Factor. So before, if you wanted to start a colonization event and you didn't have the resources, you were just stuck until you found some way in order to be able to gain those resources. And there was definitely a possibility that that was literally impossible. And so now you'll be able to spend Profit Factor, which you're going to have significantly more Profit Factor than you need by the end of the game. So it's not something that you want to just take negative values of left and right, but every so often, in order to help you be able to do something, it will absolutely make sense to spend some Profit Factor, and this is a great update. Multiple encounters have been redesigned and made more difficult based on community feedback. I'm really interested to find out what that's like, because when they say made more difficult, are you just adding some more people in, or have you really redesigned the fights in a way where someone who's played the game before and knows that fight is going to come in and say, whoa, this is much different and I have to use different tactics in order to figure out how to deal with this. So I'm not sure what this actually means, but it'll be interesting to see. Next up, localizations, most specifically for French and German languages, have been significantly updated. And then across the board, there's been an effort on the localizations to ensure consistency on the tooltips for abilities and tutorials. So those of you who are using this information should definitely, or at least hopefully, see an improvement. And finally, Obviously, with a patch this large, there's a ton of bug fixes, lag and freezing updates, optimizations, all things meant to make your playthrough and experience so much better. All the way around, I think this patch is fantastic. Looks like it's going to be a really cool experience for people who are playing through the game again, something that I plan to do sometime next year. I don't know when exactly Owlcat is going to drop a new patch. We're hoping around like April, but you know, you can't really predict these things. Whenever they do, though, I'll be all over this. Looking forward to diving into the game once again. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Take care.